Vince Russo is one of the most controversial figures in wrestling history. To some, he's a creative genius, responsible for the Attitude Era's biggest moments. To others, he's the man who drove WCW into the ground with nonsensical booking and baffling decisions. In this video, we're taking a look back at Russo's time as WCW's head writer to see if it's really as bad as we all remember. Vince Russo helped save the WWF in the late 90s. As one of the lead writers, he was responsible for coming up with some of the biggest storylines of the era alongside Vince McMahon. At the same time, WCW was falling apart, so they turned to the man who had apparently saved the WWF, hoping that he could do the same for them. But back in the WWF, Russo had Vince McMahon filtering out his bad ideas, and in WCW that filter didn't exist. To Russo, sports entertainment was about larger-than-life characters and over-the-top drama, not actual wrestling, and he especially despised the cruiserweight division. He saw the cruiserweights as filler, something that fans sat through while waiting to get to the real superstars. And he wasn't alone in that thinking. Ed Ferrara was his right-hand man from the WWF, who also came across to WCW with him. Ferrara shared Russo's philosophy on sports entertainment, but instead of getting rid of the cruiserweight division, they turned it into a joke. Ferrara cast himself as Oklahoma, which was a mean-spirited parody of Jim Ross that mocked his Bell's palsy. Oklahoma had slurred speech and a never-ending obsession with barbecue sauce. But they didn't stop there. Ferrara booked himself to win the cruiserweight title. For the entire time that Russo was the lead writer in WCW, he kept on denigrating the cruiserweight division. He made Medusa the champion and made the Mexican wrestlers do piñata on a pole matches. Russo outright said that he didn't believe that fans cared about Japanese or Mexican wrestlers, so instead of letting guys like Rey Mysterio, Juventud Guerrera and Psychosis steal the show, we got the likes of Oklahoma and The Artist winning the title. The message from Russo was clear. If you weren't American, then Russo didn't see the value in you. One thing that Russo did value was characters. He was obsessed with characters. He wanted every single wrestler to have some kind of gimmick, whether they needed one or not. Some guys already had personalities that worked, but that wasn't enough, and that led to some of the most ridiculous character choices in WCW history. Just look at what happened to Mike Awesome. Coming out of ECW, he was one of the hottest prospects in the business. He was a 300-pound wrecking machine. He didn't need dumb catchphrases or over-the-top gimmicks. He just let his wrestling do the talking for him. But Russo didn't care about wrestling. He cared about characters. At first, he actually got it right. The career killer was a great gimmick, and it made sense. Mike Awesome looked like a guy who could end careers, and he backed it up in the ring. But instead of sticking with the career killer character, Awesome was suddenly transformed into the fat chick Thriller. One week he was throwing people off cages, and the next he was feeding rotund women ham sandwiches backstage. And then when Russo got bored of that, he became that 70s guy. It was so disappointing to see talent wasted like this, and it wasn't even funny. But the strange thing is, every now and then, Russo managed to get something right. Lance Storm was the complete opposite of everything that Russo usually believed in. He wasn't a great talker, he wasn't an entertainer, he was a serious, no-nonsense technical wrestler. And yet somehow, under Russo, he got the biggest push of his career. He was booked as a technical wrestling machine, and in no time he won the US title, cruiserweight title and hardcore title all at once. It was a great bit of booking from Russo. It looked like Lance Storm was going to go all the way to the top with his Team Canada faction, and he even challenged for the world title at one point. If WCW had carried on, I'm convinced that he would have become a regular main event heel. And that's what makes Russo so frustrating, because every now and then he proved that he could actually do the job. He recognised that WCW needed fresh superstars at every level, and he tried to fix that. For years, the company had been dominated by the same old faces: Hogan, Flair, Nash, and the rest of the usual suspects. But by 1999, WCW fans were sick of it, and to his credit, Russo tried to fix that. He gave Booker T a push to the top. He'd been one of the most promising stars in WCW for years, but it always felt like he was stuck under the glass ceiling. But of course, this was Russo, so he couldn't just push Booker as himself. Instead, he briefly repackaged him as G.I. Bro, but thankfully, that gimmick didn't last long. And when he finally won the World Heavyweight title, it felt very much deserved. But Russo also pushed younger talent in the mid-card. The Natural Born Thrillers were a group of young power plant graduates, and Russo gave them the spotlight. Mark Jindrak, Sean O'Hare, and Chuck Palumbo in particular all looked like they were going to be future main eventers. And then there was Chronic. Russo repackaged Brian Clark and Brian Adams into an absolute wrecking crew. They brought back the monster tag team energy of the 1980s. Just two massive guys steamrolling through jobbers like a modern day version of the Road Warriors. But here's the problem: nothing ever lasted. Russo's booking was complete chaos. The world title changed hands so many times it might as well have been a hot potato. During Russo's year booking WCW, it changed hands 19 times. Nobody held on to it for long enough to actually mean anything. Russo just couldn't let anything breathe. He didn't trust that a story could unfold naturally. He had to keep on throwing in unnecessary drama, and maybe it made sense inside his ADHD mind, but for us fans watching at home, it was almost impossible to keep track of. And as far as the World Championship was concerned, Russo didn't see it as anything more than just a prop. To him, it was a meaningless storytelling device rather than anything prestigious. And that's how we ended up with David Arquette. On an episode of Thunder in April 2000, Eric Bischoff and Jeff Jarrett faced Chris Kanyon and David Arquette. Whoever got the pinfall would become the WCW World Heavyweight Champion. This was all part of cross-promotion for the Ready to Rumble movie, which was a wrestling-themed comedy starring David Arquette and featured WCW wrestlers. And so, just like that, David Arquette pinned Jeff Jarrett and became the World Heavyweight Champion. But just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, Russo took it one step further, because a few months later he put the belt on himself. He was absolutely obsessed with swerving the audience every week. That's why the world title lost all meaning. One week it was on a legend, the next on a mid-carder, then it was on a celebrity, then it was on himself. Everything had to be unpredictable, even if it didn't make any sense. By the late 90s, the internet had changed wrestling. The backstage drama wasn't a secret anymore. Shoot interviews and news sites had become popular amongst a certain type of fan, and Russo was basically one of those fans himself. He believed that breaking kayfabe on TV, making every promo feel like a shoot, and exposing the business was what fans wanted. But he misunderstood something crucial: that the majority of wrestling fans weren't internet fans. They didn't know or care about backstage politics, they just wanted to watch a wrestling show. Even most internet fans preferred to keep the backstage drama separate from the on-screen storylines. And it wasn't just a case of not knowing what was real and what was fake. Half the time, it was impossible to tell what was actually going on. And nothing captured that better than Bash at the Beach 2000, which was the absolute height of this nonsense. It was supposed to be Jarrett versus Hogan for the world title, but instead of a proper match, Jarrett just laid down and let Hogan pin him. Then Russo came out and cut a shoot promo on Hogan, burying him on live TV and stripped him of the title. The fans had no clue what they just watched, and even now, watching it back with 25 years of context, I struggle to work out what exactly happened. In wrestling, a well-timed swerve or a shocking title change, or even blurring the line between fiction and reality, when used occasionally, can be very powerful. But with Vince, it was every single week. It just became exhausting to watch. So yes, Vince Russo's WCW was really that bad, but credit where it's due, he had some good ideas. He understood that WCW needed fresh stars, but the problem was he never focused. WCW needed structure, stability and a long-term vision at the end of 1999, but Russo gave it the exact opposite, and by the time he was gone, WCW was beyond saving.